Right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the WGSN-DB Going Solo Network's Veterans Corner. And yes, I am back as your host, retired Army First Sergeant Paul Holbert, coming to you from glorious Northern Virginia. So for those of you who have watched our show, you know that we showcase veterans and their experiences on our show and allow them to share what they are doing within their communities. So we're going to be getting to tonight's guest in just a moment. But before we do, I want to take a minute to thank our two wonderful sponsors, Quest Jewelers of Merrifield, Virginia. You see the information on the screen. And I have to tell you that owners Pete and Wantain do great work with jewelry, whether it's custom made or a special piece that you're looking for. And I honestly have to tell you that I just took a little trip there myself this past weekend and picked up something that my wife found very beautiful there. So if you're interested in something, you're looking for something special, contact Pete and Wantain at Quest Jewelers. I also want to thank Nationwide IT Services. Nationwide IT Services is a service-disabled veteran and 8A small business. CK Park and his crew are there to help you with all of your business needs, whether it's IT, training, performance management, 360-degree assessments, whatever your business management needs are, CK and his folks can help you. So take a look, visit them at Nationwide IT Services. Or you can give them a call, and you see their number there on the screen. So again, I want to thank both of our wonderful sponsors of our show. And so let's get in and meet tonight's guest. So we have with us tonight a retired Army First Class Alphonso Thomas, who's also a pastor. We're going to get into some of that too, but Alphonso has a pretty extensive story here, and he's a retired, as I said, retired Army First Class Sergeant. I'm sorry, a retired Army Sergeant First Class. Yeah, there you go. I'm getting all tongue-tied this evening. But let's find out a little more about Alphonso, and hopefully for the show, I know Alphonso, you have your doctorate and you're a pastor, but I hope you don't mind me calling you Alphonso for.
Oh, that's fine, Paul.
And first, I want to thank you for being on the show. And
glad to be here.
I have to ask you though, you got to share this a little bit with us and share a story. Tell our audience what it's like, because you came from a family of 21 children, right?
That's right. Yeah, we came from a family of 21, and I alluded to it earlier. It was kind of strange because I thought, when I first started going to school, that everyone had a huge family. But as I started getting friends in school, I started to realize that most people only had 2 or 3 brothers and sisters. And I think having that large family was like the preparation ground for the Army, because I can remember in the morning how my mother would take the older brothers and get them out of bed, and the bathroom was theirs, and take the younger brothers, take us downstairs, and we're feeding while they're upstairs in the shower. We're in the bathroom while the girls are going through the house, making up all the beds. So it was like a order to everything. And then, we'll come back upstairs. The girls will go to the bathroom. We'll go back to make sure all our clothes are ready. And then the girls will go downstairs to eat. Then we'll go into the bathroom. And we was the smaller group, so we was the last one out of the house, because our mom believed in all the way up to I was probably about 13, walking us to school.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds like a Detroit version of the old movie with Lucille Ball and Henry Fonda, Yours, Mine, and Ours.
Yes.
They had 18 kids between the two of them.
Yeah.
And he was a Navy officer and ran his house like a ship.
Yeah.
So yeah, that sounds kind of like it. So did you have anyone in your classes at school other than brothers and sisters?
Yeah, I had a few other people, but mostly people identified as family. No, we the one thing about having that many brothers and sisters, the word would get around, and we had very few altercations because they understood there were so many of us.
Yeah,
it if you had an altercation with me, you probably gonna have an altercation with about 8 other people in the school. So.
Yeah, probably a good thing. So you grew up in that huge house, and it sounded like your parents kind of ran things really organized.
Oh, they were real organized. I think my father, he was like a real disciplinary. He worked 2 8-hour jobs, you know, to keep food on the table and everything. So he was like truly amazing. And my most vivid memories of him was like when he had that night, he had that early morning shift, because most of the time he's gone by the time we get out the house. And even as a little bitty kid, I was probably about 6 or 7. I would get up. I found out he would leave that early, so I would get up and just go downstairs with just hope of him, you know, give me a swallow of his coffee or something before he get out the house. But Mom was like, she was like the one that was running all the finances, all the organization, everything of the house. Because my dad, he probably just had to work, you know, just provide. And by the time I was, I can remember, I would say 5, 6 years old, you know, I had siblings that was grown and gone. They was out of the house, and they would like give back to the family to make sure we had enough. Yeah. So my oldest brother right now, he's 78, and I'm 58, so he's 20 years older than me.
Wow.
Yeah.
So do you mind me asking, are your parents still with you?
No, they're
all
passed. My mother about 6 years ago. I think my father 8 years ago.
Yeah.
My father lived to be 92.
Oh God.
I believe my mother was 87. If I'm correct.
Well, I tell you what, that's something to hear about that family.
Yeah.
And it's so you grew up in Detroit, and you ended up, what prompted you to join the Army? Because, you know, looking at your bio, you and I joined the Army in the same year, as a matter of fact. And it looks like you spent your entire career in the same field that I spent most of mine in.
That's correct.
So how did you?
And there's very few people that fall in that category.
Yeah.
That spent their whole career in that category. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so what prompted you to go into the service? How did you make that decision?
Well, my father would have that discussion with me right around 17 and 18. So he would come to me, you know, you're going to be grown. You got to find something to do. So finally he comes to him, because my brother owned a landscaping company. If you ever did landscaping work, it is hard work. You know?
Yeah.
And I'm talking about, we would go out at 7 o'clock in the morning, and I wouldn't see the house till 9 o'clock. You know, but he paid me pretty fair, you know, so I didn't mind working. But when I got ready to get out of high school, I was about to graduate. The one thing I remember my father tell me, well, you know, if you don't find anything, you can just start landscaping with Luther full time. And I was working downtown at the Office of Federal Contract Compliance, you know, as a high school student. And every day I would go by all the different branches of the government, you know, branches of the armed forces. So I talked to the Air Force, I talked to the, you know, all of them. And then the Army guy just had a better pitch, a better sale. And that guy just, you know, like, he talking about travel, he talking about places to go. And I like the Army. I'm going to, when I told my father and my mother, they didn't believe it. Because, you know, like, one thing about our family, nobody left the city. You know, I was like the first to actually kind of leave Detroit and go somewhere else. And that was pretty rare for our family. And even now, I got probably 3 brothers and sisters that stays out of those still living, that stays outside of Detroit. So almost everybody still, all 13 or 14 of them are still in Metro Detroit area.
Yeah. Well, you know, and I'm sure you can identify with this, with me being the same way, that, you know, having gone into the military and moved around, traveled around the world and done all this, you know, I kind of from the opposite end of the spectrum, where I cannot imagine living in one place my entire life. Right. You know, for me, it's and as a military person, I'm sure you can kind of identify with that, because I know right now you're in Alabama, and we're going to talk a little more about what you're doing now here shortly. But so you joined in 1981, went to a place that's near and dear to my heart as well, Fort McClellan, Alabama. Yeah, you spent your entire career as a nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare specialist, right?
That's right. Yeah.
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 So I got to ask you, you know, you were in for all of those years, and I'm sure that you were in at the time when you had to hit that live agent training facility there in Fort
Yes.
McClellan, where they put you in there with all the live stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It just got real. It just got real. Yeah.
Yes. I still remember that. Because like I said, you know, I spent quite a bit of time there myself.
Yeah.
You know, for Lima 5 training, the NBC Recon,
Yeah.
and all that other type of stuff. So yeah, and I know that you spent some time in Korea, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so tell me a little bit about your time in Korea.
Yeah, first I just want to say when I first went to Fort McClellan, you know, you know, graduated basic and we went right straight to AIT from there. But I remember those AIs, those instructors there told us this is what the pitch they gave us, that this was a recruiting station for cooks and for the infantry, because the mortality rate was so, you know, if so many people would fall out of the class.
Yeah.
You know, because, you know, I don't know whether you remember now, but you had like a little thing on the side of the school, and they had all these lanes in the middle of it, and you had to go through and physically perform tasks in order to graduate.
Yes.
And that's what I remember. I remember the intensity of that training, you know, and it was just amazing as we went through, you know, and how I could kind of like even today remember some of the things that went on down, you know, and down in there. What I call it is the red dirt capital of the world. Because like every time I went out there, I got that red dirt in my uniforms and my clothes, and it was so hard to get out. Yeah.
Yep. It's like that red clay, and some of it was sandy too, you know, like sandy red dirt. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, my experience in Korea, when I went to Korea, my first duty station was actually Fort Benning, Georgia, where I'm close to now. And I went to the 197 Infantry Brigade, and I was working at the 171st Chemical Detachment for the longest as a decon squad person. And I'm talking about what I got up at Kelly Hills is that they basically kind of like turned me into a chemical biological infantry, because they, you know, and once I got that on my name, on my career, everywhere I went, they kind of put me in combat arms. I never had ammo. I never had any other thing. Either it was armor, or it was infantry, or field artillery, or something like that. But I never had a chance to go. And when I went to Korea, they actually sent me to the 4th Chemical Detachment. That was the first time I was in a unit that was not combat arms. And I tell you, it was a different world. It was a different world.
Well, you know, I don't understand that, because I spent my first enlistment in a fire direction center in field artillery for 4 years. Then I re-enlisted for the Chemical Corps and spent the last 17. And you know what? As soon as I got out of field artillery, I went back to Korea, and I'll be darned if my name wasn't the first one they called going up to 2nd Infantry Division. And what did they do? They assigned me to a leg infantry battalion. And I, just like you, with that chemical thing, I don't know what it was. Maybe we had a sign on us.
Did you go? They told me I went airborne.
Yeah. You spend the rest of your career. I spent the rest of my career in armored cav units, infantry units, all that kind of stuff, with the exception of, you know, I was at Benning just like you were, where I finally had a chance for about 3 years to be an instructor. And that was the only time during that career, just like you, where I got a chance to do something that wasn't stuck out in the boonies with a bunch of combat arms.
And so I did that time in Korea as a platoon sergeant, and it was like really probably my second time in a leadership. I was a squad leader, but as a platoon sergeant, that was like some of the best time. You know, dealing with young people, motivate them, you know, trying to motivate them, keep them on the straight and narrow. You know, we understand there's a lot of things to distract your attention in Korea. So it was a challenge keeping them. And one of the things I would do is that because I knew all the infantry guys coming from Fort Benning. So I would call some of the lieutenant colonels, some of the colonels that was actually in charge of brigades, and I would ask for missions for my platoon, and they would actually call us out in the field. And after a while, I had a problem because everybody was trying to get out of my platoon because we was getting all the missions to go to the field. But that was my way of keeping all the people out of trouble too. I would actually deploy them for 2 weeks, 1 week, and it'll be a good experience because that's what I was used to. I was used to always going out in the field, and I brought that to the chemical unit. And it was the strangest thing how everybody thought my name was Mud because I actually liked going to the field.
Yeah. Hey, I still remember my infantry unit over at Camp Hovey there having to do a road march one morning in
W19. Is that 19?
No, what was it? 38th Infantry, Rock of the Marne. Yeah. And we had to do a road march for PT in MOP 4. Yeah. And I remember the soldiers hated me like it was my fault. I said, guys, this is part of the mandatory training. I didn't go in and ask them for this. So yeah, I know what you're talking about, man. I know exactly. Yeah. You also spent I believe you spent some time at that school at Fort Benning too, didn't you? Later.
Yeah. I actually became an instructor. You probably know the guy that took over for you, Augustus Francis.
Yeah, I had Augustus on the show. About five or six shows ago. Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
did.
So Augustus was my boss, and guess what he's doing now?
Yeah, I know he's reverending out there in the community, just like you. Yeah,
he's my sister pastor.
Yeah. So so when did you retire? When did you retire?
2001. I tell people I did 20 years and 3 days.
Oh my goodness. Okay. What month in 2001?
September. Well, October, end of October. October 1st was my retirement date.
Okay. So you and I retired the same year. I just retired a few months before you. I went in at the beginning, at the beginning of 1981, and then retired mid 2000.
I was planning on retiring in February because that's what time I thought I had to retire. Yeah. But I did that delayed entry thing and had forgot all about it. Yeah. And when I started asking for my retirement date, I told the lady she had to be wrong. She had to be wrong. She said, "No, that's right. That's the date." So after a while, I said, "Well, if October is the date, then that's the date I'll take then."
So you now living with your family in Alabama, around Phoenix City, somewhere around there?
Yeah, Phoenix City, Alabama area. That's where we're staying at. My family here, my wife, I met her in my first tour of duty here at Fort Benning.
Okay.
And we've been married for 37 years now.
Oh man.
Yeah, so I met her. Actually met her at a wedding. And yeah.
That's a cliche, right?
Yeah, but
a single guy goes to a wedding looking for a girl.
Yeah, my best bud married her sister. And I went to the wedding, and later on, me and her started talking, and we ended up getting married in 85. In 85, we got married. But she's from Phoenix City. Phoenix City is right across the bridge from Columbus. Columbus is the environment outside the city outside of Fort Benning. Most people don't know Columbus is the second largest city in Georgia. Yeah. And here in Phoenix City, we only got about 40,000 people that actually makes up Phoenix City. So it's a relatively small community. And my wife and I, we got 4 kids. We got a lot of them we call children, but we have got 4 kids and 5 grandchildren right now.
So you opted not to go the 21 route, right?
But one of the things I do want to iterate that that's what really made me, that increases my patriotism because, my children was all what they call premature. Yeah. And the most one of my children weighed out of 3 of them, the most one of them weighed was 2 pounds 6 ounces. Yeah. So I would have to go into that. I forgot what they call it, but it was like a program for people who have family members with sensitive medical needs. Yeah. And I would go into that program, and I learned more about what the Army was about with families through that program.
Yeah.
And I told my that really endeared me because I had a chance to go up and Walter Reed, and I saw so many military children that was getting like the top care and everything. And I'm talking about my second son, Xavier. He was like a pound when he was born. And if I took all the medical records together, because he went out to I think Central Georgia Medical Facility. He was there for a long time. The Army, get paid for everything out there, but I got the final bill or whatever for him, and then I probably would have paid in a civilian environment upwards of $4 million for my son's medical care. And the doctor would tell me there was no medical insurance or anything would have covered him that long, that we were so fortunate to have Uncle Sam there to be right there. No matter what we need, no matter what it costs, they was willing to foot the bill. Yeah, so that really endeared me to the Army, and after that, I try to tell people, you can say anything you want to, but you can't say anything about Uncle Sam that they're going to turn me against me, because, I know that they care. I know what they'll do in time of crisis.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you don't realize, a lot of people don't realize what a blessing that can be to have that support. So we're gonna take a short break, Alphonso, and when we come back, I want to continue our discussion here, because I want to talk a little bit more about how you got into your pastorship and some of the things that you're doing now. So we'll be right back, audience. We'll be right back right after this quick commercial break. All right, welcome back, everyone, and you've been listening to the WGSN-DB Going Solo Veterans Corner, and we are talking with our guest tonight, retired Army Sergeant First Class, Alphonso Thomas, and of course, Thomas is also now a pastor in his community. And I know, Thomas, that you got a Bachelor of Arts in Biblical Studies and then went on to get a master's degree in theology, and then a doctorate in divinity. But I know that you actually started to make that transition into, how can I say, the work in the church and the calling for the church before you actually left the service, didn't you?
Yes. Actually, they allowed me, and it's very rare they allow a listening person, but I had became a licensed preacher for the Baptist Association.
Yeah.
And I had my license through there. And they allowed me to pastor some over in Stone Chapel in Korea while I was there the second time.
Oh, wow.
And Yeah, yeah, and that was really an eye-opening experience, being able to talk to the people in uniform, you know, and that was really showing us. It kind of showed me that, you know, like, this is not a racial thing. This is not a thing about where I came from. This the religious part of the Christianity is a global thing, and you have to have a global mindset. You can't just channel your mind or your energy into one set of people, but you got to understand that all people are God's creature, you know. And I told my, you know, when I first started over there at Stone Chapel, it was like the first time I actually had a chance to minister to, quote unquote, you know, the Caucasians or others besides outside my race. And that's when I started understanding, if you just stick to the message that's in the Bible, then it's for all people. It's not just for a certain group of people.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, and I'm talking about, I really started going to school, and it's funny, it was a lieutenant colonel. I can't call his name, I can see his face, but he was a chaplain, and he was in Seoul, Korea, and they did a revival with the Church of God of Christ down there. And when he got with all the ministers, he told all of us, if we don't do anything else, you know, please get educated about what you're doing. Don't just, you know, like, if you want to get educated to be a doctor, a lawyer, and anything else as a professional, then he told us that we need to seek, you know, like, religious education. So we'll know when we're talking to people of other religious faith and everything, that we don't disrespect them in our conversation, that we can have healthy conversation with the Islamic, with the Buddhists, without disrespecting their faith. Yeah, and that was really eye-opening. When I started going to school or going to seminary, that was like right on line with what he was saying. You know, that, you know, we don't disrespect anybody, or we don't tear anybody down trying to build ourselves up. And I think I would never have learned that unless I sought that education in that field.
Yeah, so, you know, I would imagine that was an interesting experience, being able to serve as, you know, I guess you could say
fill-in. I was like a fill-in.
Like a fill-in chaplain, pretty much.
Yeah.
I mean, and so I can imagine that probably was kind of interesting. But I know that you know, you've done a number of other things as well. And I believe right now, aren't you doing some work at the Jehovah Jireh Bible College?
Yeah, I'm the actual vice president of Jehovah Bible College. And that college is about 27, 28 years old. It's actually came in with a Great Commission Bible College, where I got my degree at. And one of the guys wanted to branch out and start getting students from overseas, students from just all parts of the country. And that's when and I was IT. He was able to use my particular skills to help us start online training and start reaching the people, you know, not just in our neighborhood or in our group, but we was able to reach people all over the country. We have students as far as the Philippines, and then we have students all over the United States, especially in the southern region.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty interesting, especially, you know, reaching that far around the world. But I know that you, you know, what I thought, which, you know, I grew up in the South, in Mississippi.
The Bible Belt, that's what.
Yes, and I grew up in what was, you know, deeply a Southern Baptist area.
Yeah.
And what I thought was interesting was that you finally got to the point where, I believe it was 2003, where you finally felt like you had a calling to begin a new church, right?
Yeah, to begin a church.
Yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think you guys are either went on to or are, you know, building a new sanctuary.
Yeah, we already built a new sanctuary.
Yeah. So tell us about that.
When I came back from Korea, like I say, it was like an eye-opening experience as far as ministry, and I had to give credit to Billy Graham. I was chosen on the military side to work with the Billy Graham Crusade here, and I like I say, you know, and I realized if most people don't realize, Billy Graham is not associated or tied to any denomination whatsoever.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and but he is able to go reach across the aisle to the Baptist, to the Methodist, to the Catholic, no matter what the denomination is. No one seemed to have a problem with Billy Graham. You know.
Yeah.
That's just my experience with him. And when I got with him, they taught me so many things about outreach and reaching people and how to set up and organize ministries and everything. And I wanted to bring that back into the denomination I was working with at the time. But like I say, I was in no position to do it. And I kept banging my head against the wall, to be honest with you, about there's a lot I could be doing. I don't want to wait to, and it's like God just spoke to me and said, "I just do it. Why don't you just do it? All these barriers that you have already set for yourself, they're not real. You can actually do it." And I called a few people I've known for a while. And I told them what I was thinking about, and it was like, "Hey, we're on board. We're on board." And before you know it, we birthed the New Bride Christian Church right here in Phoenix City, Alabama. And matter of fact, this past Sunday was our 18th year anniversary.
Oh wow!
And within 7 years, we was able to build a new sanctuary. We got everything that we need. We had everything we need for ministry. We don't have any problem. We do. I got some people that's a tremendous at outreach for the homeless people, and our outreach is not just giving them things that we have that they think they need. Because I actually go out there and like I take off the suit and everything, go down plain clothes, just start talking to them about what they need. And one of the things I found out, mostly was socks, underwear, clothes. They didn't need no outer garments. Most of it was underwear and everything. And so we start developing to get them all those things that they need. A lot of times I thought that they was homeless because they didn't have a choice. But then as I started talking to them, and I partnered with some of the outreach centers to get people into the center, I started to find out homelessness was not the problem. Most of the time it's some type of addiction or some type of discipline that comes with being in those homeless institutions or being in there, because they don't want to let you bring your liquor in. They're not going to let you bring the cigarettes, no smoking in bed, none of that stuff, no drugs. So they got to be searched and screened before they come in, and that was the biggest problem. It wasn't the problem that they was homeless. The problem was they didn't want anybody kind of dictating to them what they could and could not do.
Yeah.
And I turned that on to the veterans over in Tuskegee, and they built a nice facility in the back of Tuskegee, just for homeless vets. They got addiction problems, and we've actually referred a couple veterans to that program since we've been here. So
that's kind of interesting to hear that, because I recently had a couple of veterans, retired officers, who went to Tuskegee and are still somewhat involved, and that's good to hear that, because that never came up in our conversation. I guess they didn't really think about it, but
yeah,
they told us a lot of other things about Tuskegee. So that's good to hear that they have a program like there at Tuskegee.
But they need, to be honest, they really need some more government funding down there. They need help, because people don't realize that Tuskegee is at the hub of a huge veteran population.
Yeah,
that we got to serve. You got a lot of military posts. There's 2 Air Force bases near Tuskegee.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Up there in Montgomery. Then you got Fort Benning. You used to have the Air Force, but the Army, the Army airfield down there in Alabama also.
Oh yeah.
So they got a huge government. They got a lot of people retiring in this area and put a lot of pressure on Tuskegee, to serve a lot of people. And I think if they branch out, if they get a little bit bigger, they're probably, or they just invest more money and get some more bodies down there, that'll help them immensely.
So what are some of the other things that your church is doing now in your community?
We do homeless feeding. Sometimes we'll get out in the community, just serve hot dogs, just do outreach, just letting people know what we do. I work with the Board of Education some here and try to make sure that, and we talk directly to the teachers, because I don't like the idea of just giving the kids the supplies, because a lot of times you give them to the kids, they might never make it to the classroom. So we figure we'll get the teachers what the teachers say they need, because a lot of times I found out the teachers were actually going out of their pockets to get supplies to students, because, actually what I did, I actually was, when I was in school, I subbed for a while and became like a permanent sub for about a year and a half in the school system. So I was able to see the problems up close and personal. And I knew I wasn't going to stay in to become a teacher, but it was good experience just learning and finding out some of the problems and the challenges that the teachers face, because one of the things I found out is that they're not paid well at all. They spend a lot of hours that we don't see, but I saw them when I was there. When I was there, the principal called me and say, "I need you to be bus monitor today." So that's an additional hour and a half. I probably had to get up and go monitor the bus. Or then they say, "We need you to be on the stand at night, after they got a sporting event." And the teacher would be there on the stand, but there's no additional pay or anything for them. All that is volunteer.
Yeah, I know. So it sounds like, it sounds like your church is really busy in the community and you're really doing a lot. But I want to ask you a question, though, about your church. I thought it was interesting that, you named the church the New Bride Christian Church.
Yeah.
And so I'm just a little curious of how you got that name.
Well, there's a guy by the name of Pastor Eugene guy. He's deceased. And before I came in the Army, he was my pastor. He pastored the New Bride Baptist Church up in Detroit, Michigan.
Okay.
And when I really didn't want to, I was kind of running, what we call running from my calling. I really didn't want to be a preacher or anything, because Pastor Guy, he allowed me to be under him. And he kind of told me he knew all the time. But he let me see the inside workings of ministry and some of the things that go on. And it totally turned me off. I'm just telling you, as far as ministry.
Yeah.
But he told me right before I went to Korea the final time, and he called me up in front of the congregation and everything. He said, "Al," because he called me Al. He said, "Do you love the Lord?" And I said, "Yes, Pastor, I love the Lord." Then he told me, "Well, you know what you got to do. Now go sit down." That was the only conversation we had.
Wow.
And I tell you, that second trip over Korea, I probably cried or had tears in my eyes all the way over there to Korea. And that's when I really finally just gave up and accepted my calling. And I worked at the Discom Chapel under a guy named Elder Mintz for the longest, the whole time I was in Korea. And then, when I came back, I worked with the Baptist Association for a good while. I worked with the laymen and men. I worked with the prison ministries. And then that's when God just told me it's time for you to branch out and do what he wanted me to do. And like I say, it's if I knew it was going to be this easy, I probably would have been doing it. But we had our challenges along the way, but they're nowhere near the challenges I thought I was going to have.
Well, I have to tell you, your story is so incredible. Coming from such a large family and leaving Detroit and, spending that military career and then, turning things you learned in the military into a ministry now where you've got a successful church.
Yes.
So, there's a lot there in your story to emulate. And before we wrap up the show tonight, I want to ask you, and I usually do this with all my guests. So before we close out the show, I want you to, if you could share one thought or one piece of advice with whether it's the veterans or just our audience in general, what would that thought be?
Well, I think it's what I call a spirit of excellence. I used to have a saying, say, "Be the task great or small, you ought to do it well or not at all." So that spirit of excellence, what the Army embedded in me. If I'm going to do something, all my energy and everything that I'm capable of doing, I ought to put into that thing that I'm doing. I don't do anything half-hearted, because time is a very precious resource, and you shouldn't waste any of your time doing anything halfway. If you're in it, then you ought to be in it with that spirit of excellence. I'm going to do my best. I'm going to get the best out of this because life is short. You know what they're saying is I try to play hard. I try to do everything with a spirit of excellence. You know, and that's one thing I think I brought out of the Army into the ministry. You know, we want to do everything with a spirit of excellence. Like we're not, if we got time, we take the time, we spend the time to make sure that everything we do is as successful as it can be.
Well, you know, I really appreciate that. And Pastor Thomas, I got to tell you, man, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show and share your story with our audience because, you know, so many veterans like yourself have such great stories to share, and yours is a good success story. So I want to thank you for being on the show. Yeah, and I want to just say, like with the veterans, like you said, so many times, you know, like it's the negative stories that makes the news all the time. It's never the stories, the good, heartwarming stories that actually make the news. And for you to have this platform to give guys that actually are doing good, you know, or doing well after they got out, you know, and they were able to transform what they did in the Army, you know, and transition to success on the outside. That's an amazing platform for that. We really appreciate you for even considering me to come on this show and just discuss that with you. Well, no, I appreciate that, but definitely it's great to have folks like you on the show to share their stories. So thank you very much. And you know, I hope to possibly be in touch with you again soon, but thank you for coming on. You know, anytime, Paul, we'll come back on. Yeah, and that one book I was talking to you about, you know, you got to let me know where to get that thing with the giant, because I got a fixation on Godzilla and giant monsters. So. All right, Pastor Thomas. Let me know. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. All right, so for those of you veterans out there listening to the show, as you know, we usually will put up some information to share with you at the end of each show. And I know that because of COVID, there are a lot of veterans out there that are struggling, that may have some debt to various government agencies or possibly the VA themselves for various reasons. So I wanted to share with you this evening, the VA has a debt management center to assist you with indebtedness to the VA and to the government. And you see the website there at the va.gov at debt man. And for those of you, if you're struggling, folks, ladies, gentlemen, please take a look at the website, go out there and see what kind of help they can give you, because, you know, even though you may be in that position, you're not alone. So again, please make note of the information and see if they can help you. All right, we want to thank you for listening to the WGSN-DB Going Solo Network and Going Solo Veterans Corner. And we want to thank our guest tonight, Pastor Thomas. As you know, we strive to bring guests on to share that positive message with the veterans and what they're doing in their life. And for those of you veterans out there, we want to thank you for your service and all that you've done for our country. And we hope that you are living your best life. So I'm your host, retired Army First Sergeant Paul Holbert, and I'd like you to visit the Going Solo Network to find out more about the network and our show. And I hope to see you again 2 weeks from tonight with our next guest. So thank you for watching.